He was
Kind of a loner.
he was kind of a loner. He was always kind of quiet, kept by himself. Now
Yeah.
you know why.
He was firing a
He's
lot.
wiped
so
out all of
yeah.
his friends, naturally.
Most people assume Hollywood fights are all about money or someone stealing a role. But sometimes the real drama comes from something more serious. Johnny Carson spent 3 decades as the country's favorite late-night host. Jerry Seinfeld became one of TV's richest and most successful comedians. So what happens when 2 comedy icons see success in totally different ways? What could make a respected legend like Carson turn cold toward a star like Seinfeld? Let's take a closer look at one of Hollywood's most surprising and personal clashes. Carson's Seinfeld Cold War. The entertainment world is full of weird fights that most people never hear about. Take Johnny Carson and Jerry Seinfeld, 2 successful comedians who couldn't stand each other, though most fans had no clue. Carson ran The Tonight Show for 30 years and basically invented the blueprint every late-night host still uses today. He had this gift for spotting talent before anyone else caught on. Robin Williams, Joan Rivers, these people owe their careers to Carson giving them that first big break. One appearance on his couch could literally change everything for a struggling comedian. Even though Jerry Seinfeld became one of the most famous and highest-paid comedians on TV, Johnny Carson never gave him the kind of support that helped so many others become stars. Back when Carson's opinion could make or break a comedian's career, his approval was like gold. But for some reason, he didn't warm up to Seinfeld. While millions of people loved watching Seinfeld's funny takes on everyday life every Thursday night, Carson, who helped shape late-night TV, just couldn't get behind a show that proudly said it was about nothing. The clash between Johnny Carson and Jerry Seinfeld is one of the more fascinating stories from behind the scenes in Hollywood. It shows what really goes on in showbiz when the spotlight fades and the cameras stop rolling. Their issues were not just about different kinds of jokes or TV timing, but ran much deeper than that. The tension had to do with how they saw comedy as an art form, how they believed the entertainment business should operate, and frankly, they just didn't click as people. People still wonder why Johnny Carson never really supported Jerry Seinfeld, even though Seinfeld was clearly talented and hugely successful. It's a mystery that keeps fans and entertainment outlets curious because it shows how tricky and personal things can get in show business. The tension between these 2 comedy icons says a lot about who they were, how they saw comedy differently, and how relationships in Hollywood can make or break a career. Things changed when Seinfeld's personal choices crossed a line that Carson couldn't accept. It wasn't just a fight of who is better, it was about values, and Carson felt Seinfeld had gone too far.
Would you please welcome the Apollo 13 team, James Lovell, Fred Hayes, and Jack Swigert.
Hollywood's generational moral divide. In 1993, Jerry Seinfeld was at the peak of his career. His hit show was the most popular thing on TV every Thursday night, and critics praised him as a rare comedy talent who changed the way Americans laughed. At 38, he had more fame and power in Hollywood than most people ever get. But during this high point, he got caught up in a controversy that hurt his reputation with many people in the industry. It started when he met 17-year-old Shoshana Lonstein in Central Park. She was just a student at a top private school, and no one expected that meeting to turn into one of the most uncomfortable public relationships in showbiz. Photos of Jerry and Shoshana kept showing up even after she hit 18, and they looked pretty cozy together. The whole thing just felt off to most people watching from the outside. Here is a guy pushing 40 at the absolute peak of his career, dating someone who was still finishing up high school. She could not even order a beer legally while he's flying around in private jets and making millions per episode. The power imbalance was pretty obvious to everyone, except, apparently, Jerry himself. This was not just about the gap between 2 adults. She was a teenager who was still living with her parents. Most people could see how lopsided that dynamic was, but Seinfeld acted like he had no clue why anyone would have a problem with it. Johnny Carson spent years building a reputation as the most trusted late-night host in America. So when Jerry Seinfeld started dating Shoshana Lonstein, Carson saw it as more than just bad judgment. He thought it was completely out of line. Someone who worked with Carson during his final years on The Tonight Show said Carson had very traditional views about how celebrities should behave. He believed that no matter how famous or successful he was, there were moral lines people shouldn't cross. Carson's whole career was based on being the kind of entertainer families felt comfortable watching every night. He believed that keeping a sense of class and respect was key to earning the public's trust. Johnny Carson was so bothered by Jerry Seinfeld's relationship with a teenager that he chose not to mention it at all during his monologues. When a joke about the couple didn't go over well with the audience, Carson told his writers to stop bringing up Seinfeld's personal life on the show. According to a former NBC executive who worked with Carson at the time, Johnny usually let a lot slide when it came to other celebrities. But in his eyes, a grown man dating a high school student crossed a line. Carson came from a time when stars knew their actions reflected on the whole entertainment world, and dating someone young enough to be his daughter broke the rules he believed every public figure should follow. Carson keeping his opinion to himself was one thing, but once big news outlets started reporting on the story, it was clear this wasn't just gossip anymore. The media attention confirmed Carson's worries about how the relationship made Hollywood look in terms of values and behavior. Still, it's worth asking, was Seinfeld's reputation really hurt as badly as Carson thought it would be? Seinfeld's controversial age gap. News outlets across America couldn't just ignore what was happening with Jerry Seinfeld's dating life back then. The comedian had gotten involved with someone way younger than him, and it made a lot of people pretty uncomfortable. What made it worse was how obvious the difference in life stages was between them. Seinfeld had already built an empire and established himself as one of the biggest names in comedy. Meanwhile, his partner was dealing with the typical challenges that come with being young and trying to make it in the world. People magazine took a particularly direct approach to addressing the situation and decided to make its stance crystal clear through its editorial choices. They published a provocative cover story with the headline, "The Graduate," which was an unmistakable reference to the classic 1967 film that explored themes of older people pursuing inappropriate relationships with those fresh out of school. People magazine knew exactly what they were doing with that headline. Using that particular movie title was smart because it already had all these built-in ideas about age gaps and power imbalances. People didn't need an explanation. They got it right away. Newsweek decided to jump into the debate and ask the tough questions that other outlets might have avoided. The magazine basically came out and asked what most people were wondering. Why would someone like Seinfeld even want this kind of relationship? He had everything going for him: tons of money, respect in his field, and decades of life experience under his belt. Yet he chose to date someone who was still trying to figure out basic adult stuff. Howard Stern, who was actually friends with Seinfeld, couldn't resist poking at the situation during radio interviews, jokingly asking him,
No matter how important you think you are, or how much press you get, mothers especially are always able to kind of level it real good.
"So you sit in Central Park and have a candy bar on a string and pull it when the girls come." What made things worse was how Seinfeld defended the relationship publicly. He told reporters that he was not an idiot and that Shoshana was a person, not an age. He also mentioned that beyond her sexuality, she was extremely bright, funny, sharp, and very alert. The relationship lasted about 4 years, from 1993 to 1997, with Shoshana even transferring from George Washington University to UCLA, partly to be closer to Seinfeld while he filmed his show. Looking back, what's really striking is how different the reaction would be today. The age of consent and power dynamics issues that would immediately end someone's career now were barely even discussed back then. The whole thing became this normalized part of entertainment culture that nobody really questioned at the time. But what does this say about how Hollywood protected certain stars back then? And does that explain why Seinfeld had no love lost for him? Seinfeld's coldness. During his 30 years hosting The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson met thousands of celebrities. But Jerry Seinfeld stood out to him for reasons that weren't all positive. Seinfeld was never rude or unprofessional, but Carson felt he lacked the warmth and humility that he admired in other performers. One writer who worked with Carson said Johnny liked comedians who were more than just funny. He respected those who were sharp, but also honest, humble, and able to laugh at themselves. While Seinfeld had the talent and quick wit, Carson felt he didn't have those deeper qualities that made someone truly great, not just successful. Another difference between Johnny Carson and Jerry Seinfeld was also clear in how they handled money and fame. Carson made hundreds of millions during his career, but he chose to live simply compared to most Hollywood stars. His life was comfortable, but never flashy or meant to show off. He gave to charity quietly, kept things low-key, and never made his wealth part of his public image. Carson's longtime producer, Peter LaSalle, remembered how Johnny certainly enjoyed nice cars and beautiful homes like any successful person might, but he never talked about these things publicly because he found that kind of bragging distasteful and believed that flaunting wealth was the quickest possible way to lose touch with the very audiences who had made his success possible in the first place. The two men could not have handled money more differently. Jerry made his wealth part of the show. Everyone knew about his car collection, over 100 Porsches sitting in climate-controlled garages. He talked openly about his syndication deals worth hundreds of millions. Carson took the opposite approach. Despite making a fortune during his 30-year run, he kept his money quiet. He came from Nebraska during the Depression, when showing off was considered bad manners. Jerry seemed to enjoy the spectacle of being rich. He built an entire show around his car collection. Carson found that approach distasteful. He believed flaunting money was the fastest way to lose connection with regular people. Two completely different philosophies about money, success, and how much distance someone should put between themselves and the people who made them rich. Carson saw Seinfeld's obsession with material wealth as proof that he'd lost touch with the very experiences that make great comedy possible. But how deep did Carson's disapproval actually run when it came to Jerry's relationship with money? Carson's comedy came from struggle. Johnny Carson worked hard to earn his spot at NBC and ended up becoming the highest-paid star on TV. But he didn't like talking about money in public. He thought it was in bad taste. One staff member from The Tonight Show remembered Carson once saying, "You don't get funnier just because your garage gets bigger." Carson would just shake his head. Johnny Carson came from a time when comedians were taught not to show off their wealth. Instead, they focused on getting better at their craft. The comedy legends Carson admired, like Jack Benny, Carson believed that staying connected to everyday life was key to making great comedy that lasts. To him, Jerry Seinfeld's style felt completely off. While younger audiences might have found Seinfeld's luxurious lifestyle exciting and something to aspire to, Carson saw it as proof that Jerry had lost touch with the very people who had made his success possible in the first place. Carson understood from decades of experience that audiences have an almost supernatural ability to sense when a performer has become disconnected from real life. And he once told his longtime sidekick Ed McMahon that when that happens, you stop being funny and just become another rich guy showing off. For someone like Carson, who valued the art of comedy above everything else in his professional life, there could be no more devastating criticism than suggesting that wealth had corrupted someone's ability to connect with their audience and make them genuinely laugh. When Jerry launched Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee in 2012, it felt like a direct shot at everything Carson had built. Jerry was not subtle about it either. He went out of his way to position his show as the anti-talk show.
What are we going to call this? How about Odie's, Squaries? Oh no, this is much bigger than that.
No desk, no couch, no monologue, no studio audience. Just him driving around in expensive cars with other comedians. Carson had spent 3 decades perfecting that traditional format. The opening jokes, the desk chat, the couch interviews, it all became the blueprint that pretty much every late-night host still follows today. Letterman used it, Leno used it, and even the newer hosts borrowed heavily from what Johnny created. It was basically the gold standard for how these shows should work. But Jerry wanted nothing to do with any of that. He'd do interviews talking about how boring it was to sit across from actors promoting movies he had never seen. He'd complain about having to fake interest in things just to fill airtime. His whole pitch was that traditional talk shows were phony and outdated, and his car show was the real deal. The thing is, Jerry wasn't just creating something new, he was actively trashing what came before. Every time he explained why his show was better, he was essentially saying Carson's life's work was garbage. That's a pretty bold move when the guy whose format he's dismissing basically gave him his first big break. It wasn't lost on people in the industry that Jerry was biting the hand that fed him. He is someone who got famous partly because Carson gave him those crucial early Tonight Show appearances, and now he's telling the world that the whole setup was fake and meaningless. That takes some serious nerve, especially when Carson was still alive to hear it. The whole thing came across as unnecessarily disrespectful. Jerry could have promoted his new show without taking shots at the format that helped make him rich and famous in the first place. The way Seinfeld positioned his new format seemed deliberately designed to make Carson's approach look fake and old-fashioned. But did Carson take this public dismissal as personally as some people thought he would? Seinfeld dismissed Carson's legacy. The tension between Johnny Carson and Jerry Seinfeld became even clearer when Seinfeld launched his show Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee in 2012. He made it obvious that he wanted to do something totally different from Carson's classic talk show style. For 30 years, Carson had perfected the late-night format, monologues, desk chats, and interviews on the couch. His setup became the model for hosts like Letterman and Leno, but Seinfeld didn't want any of that. In interviews, he said he wasn't interested in talking to actors about movies he hadn't seen or pretending to care about things just to fill time. His show, built around casual chats and fancy cars, was his way of saying the old format was outdated. In doing so, he was basically saying Carson's legacy didn't matter anymore, which many saw as a bold and dismissive move. Johnny Carson was known to take criticism personally, especially when it came to his show. He spent 30 years building The Tonight Show and cared deeply about its legacy. So when Jerry Seinfeld spoke dismissively about traditional talk shows, it really hurt Carson. He never saw his show as just light entertainment. It was much more than that to him. Carson believed his show was a way to talk to the whole country every night. Over the years, it helped people deal with major events like assassinations, wars, scandals, and big national moments.
There was a time when,
I used to have a little pop. I sure did.
One former NBC executive said Carson saw The Tonight Show as a kind of town square where Americans could come together and try to understand what was going on in the world. Carson took his responsibility as America's late-night host incredibly seriously. So when Jerry suggested that the whole format was just superficial nonsense designed to fool audiences, it cut much deeper than a simple professional disagreement. The criticism felt especially painful because Carson had spent decades proving that talk shows could be both entertaining and meaningful, offering comfort during dark times and celebration during good ones. Johnny had watched his show become a genuine cultural institution that brought families together every weeknight, and he'd seen firsthand how powerful that connection could be between a host and the millions of people watching at home. What made Jerry Seinfeld's comments especially hard for Johnny Carson to accept was the fact that Carson had helped launch Jerry's career. Like many comedians from that time, Seinfeld got his big break by appearing on The Tonight Show. Those appearances helped him connect with audiences across the country and build the fan base that made his sitcom possible. Carson gave Jerry airtime when he was still a mostly unknown stand-up comic, something money couldn't buy. So when Seinfeld later dismissed the talk show format as outdated and pointless, it felt like a slap in the face. Carson and his supporters saw the irony. The very format Seinfeld was now criticizing had once been the key to his success. What really bothered Carson went deeper than career politics. It was about how Jerry approached comedy itself and what he thought it should accomplish. Did Seinfeld's whole philosophy about humor represent everything Carson believed was wrong with modern entertainment? The emotional comedy void. When Jerry Seinfeld spoke badly about the kind of talk shows that helped make him famous, a lot of Johnny Carson's longtime fans saw it as rude and ungrateful. During his retirement, someone asked Carson what he thought about Jerry's comments. With his usual dry humor, Carson said that without talk shows, Jerry might still be doing stand-up in pizza joints on Long Island. He said it with a smile, but people who knew Carson could tell he was hurt. During his 30 years on The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson always supported comedians who were not afraid to show real emotions, even when things got messy. He admired Richard Pryor for being honest about tough topics like race, addiction, and personal struggles. He respected George Carlin for speaking boldly about society and making people think. And he was drawn to Robin Williams, whose wild energy often hid deep pain and vulnerability. During his 30 years on The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson always supported comedians who weren't afraid to show real emotions, even when things got messy. He admired Richard Pryor for being honest about tough topics like race, addiction, and personal struggles. He respected George Carlin for speaking boldly about society and making people think. And he was drawn to Robin Williams, whose wild energy often hid deep pain and vulnerability. Carson might have been onto something that everyone else missed back then. Seinfeld wasn't just getting rich and famous. He was basically creating a whole new template for what celebrities could be. This was different from the old days when stars at least pretended to be humble. Jerry made his wealth part of the show itself. The two men came from completely different worlds. Carson grew up when comedians had to work their way up through real hardship. Back then, getting successful was supposed to make someone more grateful, not more arrogant. What do you think about a comedian publicly trashing the very talk show format that launched his career after he'd already made hundreds of millions? And is it really fair to judge Carson as old-fashioned when Seinfeld's behavior with that teenager would still raise eyebrows today? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.